Hello everyone, my name is Phil Simeone with Centurion Technologies. Welcome to our webinar on an unconventional defense for a common IT security threat. I just wanted to give you all the 5-minute notice. We'll be starting right around 10 o'clock. Just to let you all know, your microphones will be muted for presentation purposes, but if you have any questions, we encourage you to ask them using our chat and questions panel of the GoToWebinar interface. Again, just letting you know that we're going to be starting the webinar in 5 minutes. Thank you. Hello everyone, this is Phil Simeone with Centurion Technologies. Welcome to our webinar on an unconventional defense for a common IT security threat. Joining us today, we have security expert Scott Schaefer, CTO of Blade Technologies. Scott is also a guest IT consultant for KPLR Channel 11, KTVI Fox, News Talk KTRS, so you can hear him on the radio on there, News Talk KTRS, as well as FM News Talk 97.1. Scott's going to be discussing the most common security IT threat, the space between the keyboard and the chair, and how can your organization protect itself from that common IT security threat. So what I'm going to do is Scott's going to go over some things. He's got a great presentation to show everyone. Again, I want to encourage everyone to ask questions using our questions and chat panel of the GoToWebinar interface. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
Well, I thank you much, Phil. Thanks so much for the nice introduction, and good morning, everyone. I don't know where you all are, but St. Louis, it's a beautiful day here today. As Phil mentioned, we're going to talk about an unconventional defense for a common IT security threat. And what is that IT security threat? Phil kind of alluded to it. It's the user. We can design the most highly secure and highly available computer network with 150 firewalls per user or everything, right? We can make this thing so secure that nobody can get into it. However, if we're not addressing the user as a vulnerability, as a risk, then we're not doing our job as network engineers. A lot of the times, the weakest link in a chain of security is the user's data and the software the user runs. One thing we're seeing more and more, it's not just users misconfiguring their workstations and those sort of things, which is really not their job, that's ours, right? But we're seeing more and more attacks on users using social engineering. And that's something, when you think of hackers and how they hack into systems and get control of things, a lot of times the vision you get is a guy in the basement behind a keyboard with no lights, and he's hacking away trying to break in. Well, really, that's not the easiest way to do it nowadays. You can certainly try to manipulate people through social engineering. And every year, for example, at the Black Hat conference out in Vegas, all the hacker conference, quote unquote, they always have a contest based around social engineering. And this past year, one of the challenge is to get into a Fortune 500 company using only social engineering. So then that's what you do. You'll be surprised. I've done different types of social engineering experiments and audits and such, and especially in the hospital industry, you put on a white lab coat, you can pretty much do anything you want. You don't get challenged. You can walk around. People log you into systems and these sort of things. So really, that's what social engineering is. It's fooling users. And then what do we want to fool them to do? Number one, if they'll give us their password, that's always great. And back to this Black Hat conference they had, they were able to achieve to get into one of the Fortune 500 companies, log into systems, and so on. And the way they had it, the way they got that information, those credentials, was they gathered some information on the internet about certain department heads in certain areas and basically called them up and say, hi, I'm Scott from the IT department. I'm working for home today, and we're working on your account. We're seeing some security problems. Could you please give me your password so I can look into this? And it was very interesting, the results they had. 70% of the men that they talked to on the phone gave up the password or gave them another piece of information that let them continue the social engineering attack. Interestingly, 70% of women did not. So maybe that's an insight into the psychology of men versus women, but that's something that you really need to instruct your staff and understand that social engineering attacks are going to be coming more and more, and they want passwords, credit card numbers, social security numbers, or hey, I'm going to email you this file, why don't you double click on it, and then of course, all kinds of bad things happen. So that's something that more and more our users are vulnerable to, and they need to be educated. There's not a lot we can do from a technical side. We just need to educate and make sure they understand. But that's definitely an area of vulnerability that the users introduced for us. Another one is the password. And I threw up a slide here. These are the worst passwords of 2014, list that comes out several years. This was from Splash Data. And you can see number one there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I think I could guess that. Or number 2, which is password, or QWERTY at baseball. And one that's not in there this year that always usually is monkey, which I have no idea why that happens. But that's the thing. And you have to make sure that you have good passwords. Don't use default passwords. Don't have everybody use the same password. Don't have users share passwords because, again, this is something of education. You need to let your users know. You don't want to give up a password because then if somebody gets into their system, it looks like it's you. So in a large way, users are entrusted to the security of their own systems, but they will bypass security measures if they're given a chance. So the way I phrase it is that we erect barricades for our users. We don't erect brick walls. The barricades, if you really want to jump it and get out of line and go somewhere you shouldn't go, you can jump them. It's not like a brick wall where you can't. So that's one of the ways that I look at that. So, it's just, what Phil said is the problems between keyboard and chair. And that's what we're seeing more and more. We have to address the user. Now, another area of our computer network that is vulnerable are our workstations. And that, of course, is the primary way a user interacts with the organization's network is via the workstation. We're seeing more and more, however, the bring your own device, the BYOD concept, where people are bringing in their own tablets and smartphones. And that's probably a discussion for another day because that introduces a whole new set of risks and problems that we have to worry about. So we just need to understand that this is how the user gets in. And really our only protection and our only standard protection is anti-malware. And there's various different vendors, pluses and minuses with all. It's important to note that these guys are usually put head-to-head every year in a contest, and generally it's the same 4 or 5 guys in the top, the McAfee's, the F-Secures, and AVG, and so on. So that's something we do today. And the downside of our current anti-malware in general is that it's definitions-based, right? So when we update our antivirus, which we should do all the time, and most of the time we should have that automated, or it's pushed down from a server or something like that. But these are basically dictionaries of viruses, malware, so on and so forth. So the antivirus program is sitting there watching everything come through, and it's taking a look at it, and it's comparing the patterns that it's seeing with what's in its dictionary. And if it finds a match, great. Okay, that means, hey, that piece of code is malicious, and we're going to quarantine it, delete it, or however way the program's set up to do. We're seeing very little of heuristics, right, where you're invoking a certain level of artificial intelligence to make a decision whether an unknown piece of code coming across that doesn't match the dictionary, is that a malicious piece of code or not? So that's something that, as you can probably guess, is getting harder and harder to do because malware writers are getting slicker and slicker about bypassing this stuff. Also, anytime we're starting to introduce things like artificial intelligence into our systems, that really, it's not so good nowadays where we can trust it to take care of all this traffic. So there's little heuristics with this. And one of the biggest problems that we have with our current anti-malware type solutions are, the idea of zero-day attack, right? And what that means is, and I kind of have a graphic up here of where the problem lies, this window of vulnerability, is that let's say a hacker discovers a vulnerability. Now, if this guy discovers something that way he can get into a Windows system, let's just use that as an example. So this hacker discovers through research that he can get into Windows systems by executing a certain piece of code. So it's not like he's going to immediately say, hey, this is great, let's go attack people. That's not the way it works. Then you go ahead and you refine that process. You create an exploit that'll go in there, and with the idea of not just getting into this vulnerability, but letting you do more things after that. For example, if you take control of somebody's machine, you want to then go to the servers and try to get user accounts and that sort of thing, so you really can own the network. So once this exploit is created, and when the attack is launched, that's day 0, right? We've never seen this attack before. That's why it's called zero day. Here it comes. So there's a problem. The attack is launched. None of the signatures, the antivirus signatures, have been updated with this new definition yet, right? So the antivirus cannot find this new zero-day attack until the vendor finds out about it, number one. Number two, they have to build a signature so their product can go in and find this piece of malware as it's traversing their systems. and then the vendor has to distribute that signature, these updating your definitions, and then you have your IT admin install the signature. Where I see us usually falling down is between the vendor distributing the signature and the IT admin shoving it down to the clients. Now, some people have this set up where it's fairly automated. Other people want to have a little more control over when definitions are actually sent out to their end users. Whatever way that your organization is set up to do that, as long as you get these signatures out as quickly as possible, doesn't really matter what methodology you use, because it's just so important for these zero-day attacks. And we're seeing more and more of these coming out. An interesting statistics that I read the other day, we're talking about workstations here, but just to allude to the tablets in the smartphone world for a second, and really those are kind of workstations for our intensive purposes. But it's interesting to me, there are more exploits and malware developed for the Android platform every month than there are for Windows, all versions. Which is really surprising to me. You would think Windows is still 90% plus of the desktop market in the world, and you'd think that's a really big target, which it is. But the hackers, the bad guys, are understanding, since we're using our mobile devices more and more, that that's where the data is, and that's what we want to get after. So along the same line, you may want to look at, again, this BYOD concept. How are you going to handle that? Are you going to put out anti-malware onto your smart devices and these sort of things? So this is what we need to watch out for with these zero-day type attacks. We're vulnerable for a certain length of time. And if it's a targeted attack by a hacker, we could be in real big problems, because the attack is launched and then you have a targeted attack on a certain company or a group of individuals. You know, that can really get sticky. You can have some big problems there. Hopefully you've never seen this before. Computer blocked by the firewall of the United States, which always gives me a little giggle. This is an example of the malware called ransomware that we're seeing more and more. And this is what I think right now, from an end user perspective, from a user vulnerability, workstation vulnerability perspective, this is one of the most insidious ones out there. Because what it does, if you don't know, is this stuff gets on your computer, either opening a malicious attachment or going to a malicious website and getting kind of like a drive-by where somebody loads this onto your system. And what it does in the background, once it gets installed, it goes through your workstation, and some versions actually go out to the network too, and looks for all different types of user documents, right? So it's looking for like .docx and .xlsx and PPT and so on and so forth. It finds them and then encrypts them all. And we're not talking some wimpy encryption with like a 4-character password. This is industrial strength encryption that you are not going to break. I don't care if you have a room of supercomputers. If you've got maybe a couple thousand years, maybe you might be able to crack this encryption. But so once the bad guys have a hold of your data and it's encrypted, you don't have a choice. So what they do in this case, for this piece of malware, is that they want you to pay, and that's usually the bottom line on all these sorts of things. It's greed. People want money, or they want information from you that will make them money. So it always boils down to greed. So this is really a blatant greedy grab, because in this case, hey, you know, you go ahead and pay me the $500 through this money pack in this case, and then I'll send you the code, and which will be the decryption code, which will unlock all your programs, so you can go back to work. Now, we see this a lot in our practice. We work a lot with small to medium businesses, a lot of businesses that don't have any security professionals on staff. In fact, I would probably think you're probably going up to 250, 300 user seats before you get into having dedicated security professionals on your network. So a lot of people rely on us. So we get exposed to a lot of different things. And we've had, I know of within our client base, we've had a good dozen of people get hit with the ransomware, the crypto locker virus, or these sort of things. And interestingly, I know there's a couple of police stations here, police departments here locally that have gotten infected with some version of ransomware. And in all cases, they paid the ransom. If you think about it, this is an example of why you should have a good backup, because you can go back to it. Or, as we're going to see here in a little bit, like a technology like Centurion SmartShield, which is an unconventional way to go about it, but it really is a good solution to help out with these sort of ransomware products, which I think we're going to see more and more of in the future, which we'll get into a little bit of that here in a bit. Also, we want to make sure that we watch out for things like keyloggers. These sort of things get on our systems more and more. This is an example of Kaspersky finding one. Keyloggers, what they do is they essentially track every keyboard stroke on your system. Back in the olden days, right, back in like 10 years ago, it used to be you'd only have to do that in a hardware fashion. You'd have to sneak a little piece of hardware between the keyboard and the CPU so you could grab that. But that's not the way anymore. This is all done through software. And again, it boils down to the whole greed angle. People want your credit card numbers. They want your credit card site passwords. You want the banking passwords. And with a keylogger, boy, that's a really good way to grab it. So you can see every key press that happens, which is another type of thing that gets on your system, and it's sometimes hard to get off. One thing we see a lot, too, is these guys, the little removable USB devices, are some of the most difficult things to handle in any organization. Many organizations we work with, we shut down all access to these USB storage devices via generally a Windows group policy or some other method as such. The problem is that we have users that have these, and I've got one on my keychain right now, sure, and I'll plug it into my workstation, and generally nowadays with cloud storage, we're not doing like what we used to do, copy a file into our USB drive, take it home, and work on it on our computer. That's not as much. But you have more and more people still carrying stuff around, important company data on an unencrypted USB stick that they can lose, drop, somebody could steal it from them, and then you have a data leak, right? So that's something to be concerned with too. They're also the other way around. Not only can we lose data on the outbound side, we can get bad stuff coming in on the inside side. One of my personal practice areas is based around digital forensics and risk assessments, those sort of things. And one thing I find, just kind of doing a risk assessment, see how educated people are, is I'll take a little USB drive and I'll put something on it, probably the iCar test virus or something like that, and I'll put it on there, and then I'll just take it and toss it into the employee parking lot. 100% of the time, it gets picked up and put into somebody's computer every time. And in fact, this is probably the way that air gap systems are most often attacked. And what I mean by air gap systems are control systems, for example, that aren't on the computer network. So there's a gap. There's no wire going into this thing. There's no wireless connection. So it's air gapped, right? But this is a way, for example, you remember the Stuxnet worm that apparently the Israeli and United States intelligence services wrote. That got onto the Iranian nuclear reactors on their centrifuges a few years back. This was most likely the way that it got on the system, that somebody gave a USB drive, got plugged into this air-gap system, the Stuxnet virus worm got onto that system and made the centrifuges spin so fast they spun themselves apart. So that's an example of how these little guys are less and less desirable to have in your organization. And we could talk all day about that sort of thing, but let's move on and talk a little bit more about another vulnerability, an idea called the advanced persistent threat. So what is an advanced persistent threat? This is something that we have to look out for. This is really our worst malware type that we have to deal with. So an advanced persistent threat, first off, is targeted. It's after a single individual. It's after a single company, or even a nation state, anything along those. It's not an accidental thing. It's not a drive-by. It's not I double-clicked on a website and just randomly I received this. No. And in fact, here recently there was some major hotel chains that had, it was like a high-end hotel chain. If I told you who it was, you'd definitely heard of them before. But what they found was they had certain individuals that were high-end people that would stay there. So there was advanced persistent threats against these people. These hackers somehow knew when these fat cats were going to be staying at these nice hotels, and then they were able to directly target them. either with things like man-in-the-middle attacks or custom-made malware, these sort of things. Again, bottom line, greed. Maybe it's knowledge that they're going to turn into money or money itself. So definitely targeted. Also, it's an advanced attack. What we're looking at then is a zero-day attack, something that's brand new, no one's seen before. So you're going to target somebody with this advanced piece of malware that never stops. That's the persistent side. It just keeps going after you and going after you at different directions from different devices, from different connections, and it's persistent and constantly tries to get onto your system. And these are the most dangerous kinds. And this is the type of problem that we have with users and workstations that we're going to see more and more of, where these attacks are going to be targeted towards certain people, certain companies, these sort of things. Now, with that said, the SmartShield product. Now, how this works and how this can help us in a lot of these different sort of scenarios is that what's the SmartShield suite does, it gives you proactive protection, eliminates changes. But let me just talk to you about how it really works is it creates a virtual space where any changes can be wiped out on the reboot. So let me just give you an example. Let's say a good place to consider using SmartShield, for example, is a classroom with computers. And what you can do with this product is you install it, you configure it, and then let's say you have let's say you're in high school, you have a bunch of 10th graders on your computer lab on all the systems, and then you have to control these people. You know, these kids are going to load a game or something like that. So after class, you spend about 2 hours cleaning up all the garbage that they put on the workstations. What's up with SmartShield, what happens is you can configure it is when you reboot that computer, it goes right back to its original state. So anything that user did, anything like that, reverts back. Now, of course, you can exclude certain directories where you'd have documents and user files and so on, because you wouldn't want to necessarily get those rolled back, for example. But what this allows you to do then, it's not such a overhead to fix a really bad malware infection on a workstation. I know anyone out there's a system admin, you've always been called in to, hey, you know, Joe Schmo has a virus and it's throwing up a bunch of pop-ups or something like that. And then, you know, how much time do you spend? Even the most advanced solutions, like doing imaging across the line, I mean, you're looking at 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the size of the workstation, to shove this new image across the line. And then there's going to be, you know, specific user configuration pieces, things like an Outlook profile, these sort of things you're going to have to manually do. So you look at that, the time that you're going to lose doing that versus the SmartShield product, which all you do is reboot. And that's why it's an unconventional way to do it. You know, it's that easy. You just reboot. And a lot of people, when I talk about this product, you know, you kind of get that look in their eyes going, well, what do you mean it's just reboot? Oh, yeah, you just reboot it. You don't have to go to that system and just hack away at it to get this virus off, this piece of malware off the system. Just reboot. So you have a problem with an user calling a help desk, you know, just have them reboot. So that's a great way to go about it because it's effective, it can be centrally managed, and so on and so forth. So good product, great way to go about you know, looking at how to protect your workstations and users from all this malware and bad stuff. And, you know, not only protect, but be able to revert, be able to quickly take care of the problem and get the user back up and, you know, making money, right? That's the idea. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it over to Jesse for our first poll question. Then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this. You there, Jesse?
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it.
No problem.
So thanks. So I'm going to go ahead and send a poll question to you. So this is our first question. I'm going to launch that poll. You should be able to see it now. Has your organization experienced a security breach of any kind in the last 2 years? So please just go ahead and answer the poll, and I'll give you about 20 seconds from here. So about 5 more seconds. If you could get your poll votes in, I'd appreciate it, and we will share the results. All right, thank you. So I'll go ahead and share the results on the poll. And it looks like 17% of you said yes, 50% said no, and 33% are uncertain. So that gives us a good idea. Thank you very much. And I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Scott. Thanks,
All right.
Scott.
All right, thanks, Jesse. And, I kind of snicker when I see the poll results. I know I answered uncertain because can you really be certain for sure that you don't have a security breach of some sort going on ongoing? I think let's say hopefully you have that covered, but I think more often than not, people have a security risk they don't know about. If we knew about them, we'd attack them, right? So anyhow, we're going to talk a little bit more about information and technology controls now, and this is about kind of from the other end. We've been talking about users and workstations and the vulnerabilities they introduce to our networks. Now we're going to look kind of from the CTO, the CIO perspective on how we look at IT overall and how we control these sort of things. So, and also I'm going to introduce a framework that you can potentially use to be able to do this yourself. And that's going to be called the 20 Critical Controls for an Effective Cyber Defense from the SANS Institute, which we'll talk about. So IT controls are specific activities performed by persons or systems to make sure that the business objectives are met, such as keeping the systems up so people can work. That's one big business objective. And, as we mentioned, the SANS group helped develop it and the framework we're looking at. And just to give you a little background on how these 20 critical controls were developed was that NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, was asked by the federal government to come up with a framework on how to keep their systems secure and how to control privacy and the data and so on for federal institutions. So they came up with this publication 800-53. Great publication, wonderful reading if you like to go through 460 pages of government speak. So very thorough, very good controls, way too overblown for anyone in our marketplace and the private industry to be able to really do well. It was also confusing and frequently contradicted itself. So the Department of Defense then asked the NSA, our buddies at the NSA, to make this a little easier to use. So they introduced this information to the SANS Institute and the Center for Internet Security, where they went through and took these 460 pages and boiled it down into 20 controls that are easy to understand, any organization can use as a framework for their cyber defense. And they are here. So you can find this. We'll put a link up where you can find it, but it's pretty easy. It's sans.org, SANS.org. And they have a bunch of good stuff up there. Really encourage IT pros to take a look at this if you haven't already. And then just search for critical security controls, and you'll find they have a poster. They have a whole section of their website that just goes through and helps you understand these controls and how you can potentially introduce them into your environment. But just briefly, if you look at them, you're basically going from control 1 is for immature IT organizations if you don't have this. If you don't have an inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices on your network. If you don't have that, you really don't have to worry about control 20 penetration tests and red team exercises because you're not ready for it. You basically have to go through the process and, find out, try to grab the low-hanging fruit first. And a lot of times that's inventory 1 and 2, hardware and software. Find out what you have. It's difficult to construct a good cybersecurity strategy when you don't know what you have out there. So, it seems like pretty easy to understand, seems like it's intuitively obvious, but this is where a lot of people fall down. They try to jump ahead and do the cool stuff, right? Like the instant response and penetration testing, which is cool. The sexy stuff. But you got to do the grunt work first. You got to get those inventories in. You got to understand what your configurations are. Number 4, something too, you need to constantly look at your vulnerabilities to have them assessed. It's a constant risk assessment. And the people on the business side of the business understand risk assessments. So that's something I encourage IT pros to interface with their business leaders to help them understand that risk assessment is not just for the business, but IT is a big part of our business. That also needs to be risk assessed, and it needs to be constant. We work with many firms that we do quarterly reviews of their vulnerability. A lot of it's automated, where we can pick up certain information on their network or on the edge of their network, and then we can help them with understanding where the risk is and how to mitigate it. Because some risks you're never going to mitigate, right? You're always going to have risks in life, in business, or in IT. It's just the way it is. If we don't have our systems to be vulnerable, then you unplug them from the wall and make sure they're turned off, and then I'm not even really sure if they're going to be completely secure in that fashion. So these critical security controls, take a look at them sometime. And one thing that SmartShield can do for you with the critical security controls, it helps you right off the jump be able to cover some of them. And again, I mentioned the low-hanging fruit. Here's some that maybe you can get really quick. And one is the secure configuration for hardware and software on laptops, workstations, and servers. One component of the secure configuration could be the SmartShield technology. Because you look at this and it's, secure configuration, what can be really, you think about it, what can be more secure if you can revert back to where you were, at the beginning of your computing session. So that's pretty secure. So I think that would definitely be a component of that control, of that mitigating of that control. Malware defenses, obviously. I think we've beaten that horse to death this morning. Data recovery capability, control number 8. This is one a lot of people struggle with because our users have 100% of all their data is on the server, right? So it gets backed up every night. It's not, no, that's not the way it works. I don't care who you are. Your organization has business-critical information. It's on somebody's laptop that leaves the building. So how do you recover from that? How do you recover from ransomware? How do you recover from any sort of malware? So you need to have that capability. So SmartShield could certainly be a component of your mitigation with that as well. Also, something that a lot of firms struggle with, data loss prevention. Same sort of idea as the data recovery, where SmartShield can help you revert back. You can centrally control this sort of thing. You can kind of watch out, because the data loss prevention is something we're going to be talking about more and more. One thing that I've seen in the industry, one of the trends being that more and more regulatory organizations are taking a close look at this when they're doing auditing. People that have to comply under Graham-Leach and HIPAA and SOX and those kind of things, right? But we're also seeing now more and more insurance companies, right? If you want to get a cyber security policy, which is becoming more and more the norm, they're going to send you a pretty intense risk assessment you're going to have to complete. And most small to medium business owners are not going to be able to answer a lot of those questions. But do I look at that as a bad thing? Not necessarily. That's a good thing, because we really need to really take this whole idea of risk assessment to heart as IT pros. We really have to take a step back from the technology, which is hard for a lot of IT guys. They got into it because the technology. Nobody wants to sit there and do risk assessments and interview users and that sort of thing. That's never fun. But people need to understand, the idea of doing good risk assessments is something that we all have to do in the IT world. Now, a few more things about SmartShield that I want to point out. I think you get a good idea, and this is really just a thumbnail sketch. I'm sure Phil, Jesse, any of the guys from Centurion Online could really deep dive into the capabilities, because I'm barely scratching the surface here. But one thing that I found is that a lot of people rely on the old system restore. They're saying to me, if I introduce SmartShield to them, they're going to say, oh, well, some say that, hey, we already have that. We have system restore in place. So if we have an issue that we can roll back, to a previous point in time, which is, okay, maybe that's somewhat a mitigating situation. But my problem with system restore is too often do I see the big red X. It doesn't always work well. You can also have issues with it causing problems with your programs and things like that. And these are the types of things that SmartShield helps you avoid. You don't have to rely on system restore. There's also problems with system restore in general. I don't think that we, in general, enable this on networks nowadays, because the problem is, let's say you get some malware installed on your system, and then the system decides to do a checkpoint, right? Do a restore point, and then a few days later, you have to roll back to that restore point, where you're going to get reinfected with that piece of malware. So that's something where system restore kind of falls down in that regard. Also, something else that I found, I mentioned earlier on that one of my areas of practice is digital forensics. So I do expert witness work and digital investigations and so on and so forth. So when we were talking to Phil and Rob over at Centurion talking about the SmartShield product, something that jumped to mind was, okay, I get it. You know, you guys roll back in time. You have a certain file kept somewhere that captures the changes. I get it. But what about a forensic perspective? Let's say, you know, I'm the CFO of a company and I decide to go rogue and start stealing some money, right? So that's going to leave all kinds of digital footprints on that system. You know, I'm going to be able to go through and find all kinds of fun stuff that I'll be able to track down and, you know, take a look at. This is actually from a case I recently worked on where we're pulling off stuff from an old machine that had been on the shelf for like 3 or 4 years that needed to go back, because it was a scenario where you have the crooked CFO. And we were able to go back and find some stuff. So let's say you're using SmartShield and, you know, you're doing something, you roll back. Now, remember, everything is stored in that file in the system. Is it possible to find that file, get it back, and to be able to cut in and carve into that file and see the changes that were made? And I did a lot of testing on it here in my labs, and I was not able to do so, which I was kind of surprised. You know, SmartShield does a good job about cleaning up after itself, I suppose. And I was kind of impressed with that, frankly, because other products don't do that. They always leave some artifacts behind. If those artifacts are any good, you know, who knows? But from a digital investigative perspective, you know, every little breadcrumb could mean something. You know, we can go through, if you look at my spreadsheet here, the first line that's highlighted in red, you know, this is where the logon screen shaver fired up, right? And then after that, a registry key was deleted. So what's this all mean? You have to look at the whole of it when you're doing the digital investigations. So this, from my perspective, I don't know how I would approach it. If I was asked to look at a system that had SmartShield installed and wanted to look at the history of that system, I don't think I could go in front of a court and say, I know exactly what happened when, because it rolls back and SmartShield does a good job cleaning up after itself, so it doesn't leave anything behind, which is great because you don't want somebody getting that and doing bad things with it. You know, it's interesting. It's, again, an unconventional approach to these sort of issues. So, and I'm sure I, again, have only come up with a couple scenarios that SmartShield could be used for in this regard, and I'm sure there's a lot more. But this is something that, you know, I find most intriguing, that really helps you do a nice secure configuration on that workstation. So with that said, I'm going to kick it back over to Jesse for poll question number 2.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. It's fascinating stuff. All right, I'm going to fire up our next poll. What do you feel is your organization's biggest security threat? And I'll launch that right now and give you about 30 seconds to answer. So go ahead and get your votes in. We'll give about 5 more seconds now. So it looks like we have everyone's votes in, so I'm going to close the poll. And we'll share the results. It looks like almost 30% of you thought the user, and many of you, the vast majority, thought all of the above, and still 14% of you are uncertain. So I'll go ahead and drop that poll back down and turn it back over to Scott. Thanks for voting.
All right, thanks, Jesse. Yeah, you know, I agree with that poll as well. All of the above, I would think, because there's so many things that we have to worry about as IT security professionals, and a lot of times it's a matter of prioritization. And the way I feel is you have to really take care of your potential security problems at the end user and workstation area and work back instead of starting at the firewall level and working in. In my opinion, and the reason I say that is I think a lot of times the workstation and user component of a security program is somewhat overlooked, or hey, those darn users, who cares about them type of attitude. So, it's one of those things. So, a few kind of closing thoughts about SmartShield and everything we've talked about today. And the first thing is, we talked a lot about SmartShield, great product, but as system administrators, you should use all the tools that are available for you. You have to make sure that you're using good cybersecurity best practices. There's not one tool that you can install on your network that you could say, okay, click a button and hey, now I'm completely compliant with best practices on cybersecurity. If you happen to know one, let me know, because that would be a good investment. Or if you want to build one, that would be good too. So we have to use whatever tool we can. So maybe SmartShield will be good for 20% of your users on your network. Maybe it makes sense. And that's the nice thing about the product. You have very flexible implementation framework, so you can do it in many different ways. So that's something you can take a look at. Another thing that we need to really focus on as IT pros is that we need to measure our cyber defenses because sometimes we get a little myopic. We work on our network, and I know my network really, really well. Well, sometimes that is not a plus, that's a minus, because maybe something's staring you right in the face that you're just overlooking. So it's always good to get a third party in there to help, even if you have a second set of eyes, to go in there and take a look. And this kind of goes with the risk assessments and that our practice does. And this is where you can go in there and you get a second set of eyes. I don't think there's an IT pro out there that wouldn't agree that you can't have too many people looking at a problem to help evaluate. Too many qualified people. Let me back up one. We don't want our end users giving us a whole lot of IT security advice in this regard. So you need to measure your cyber defenses, and you need to pick a framework. There's many of them out there. We talked today about the 20 critical security controls for effective cyber defense from SANS.org. That's one framework. I generally use that one as like a generic framework for most businesses, that if we can do these 20 controls well, that we are aces. I mean, we're in great shape. By the way, none of the many customers I work with has ever got 20 out of 20. I mean, we want to get on to that maturity, but it takes time. You have to do the simple things, baby steps first. So maybe use that framework. If you're in the healthcare fields, HIPAA, HHS has a really nice framework built around HIPAA that will help you. And for anyone that's in the medical fields or anyone that has to comply with HIPAA, just note that they're doing a whole lot of meaningful use audits right now. So they're really coming in, and they're not fooling around anymore on the HIPAA stuff. They're not slapping wrists as much. They're giving fines out. So that's one framework you could use. If you're in the Sarbanes-Oxley world, SOX 404 has a big, nice framework that you can get, and so on and so forth. If you're in the electrical industry or power generation, there's NERC is one of the standards that you have to comply to. And one thing I like about the 20 critical security controls is they have mapping from their framework to other frameworks. For example, if you do controls 1, 5, 6, and 10, you've complied with NERC requirement, 13C or something like that. So they have mapping that kind of helps you guide that. So, take a look at that. And you always want to use the right tool for the job. If SmartShield, if what you've heard today sounds intriguing, I encourage you to talk to Phil and his team more about it, because, again, I have covered maybe 1% of what the product could do. We haven't talked about a lot of the management, some of the anti-malware built into this product, other scenarios. There's a lot there. It's a big package. I know you can go up to the website, get a lot of information, which they have a lot of good stuff up there. And, again, engage with Phil and his team. I know they'd be more than happy to come to your location, give a webinar, whatever, if you have any specific questions about the product. And, I encourage you to take a look at it. It's a good tool. It could be used in most organizations in some area. I mentioned education's a great one that we can really leverage this product. But there's a lot more, and I'm sure there's there's items that I haven't even thought of. So I'd be interested to hear what Phil had to say about that. So with that said, I'm going to pass it back over to Phil and see if we have any questions. And Phil, if you or Jesse, if you want to spend just a couple minutes kind of elaborating on what I was just talking about in reference to the product, since you guys know it a whole lot better than me.
No, that's great. Scott, thank you very much. Truly the depth of your knowledge is unfathomable when it comes to IT security. Yep. So as Scott had pointed out, SmartShield is a piece of your whole package when it comes to IT security for your organization. With SmartShield, you can use it with group policies, you can use it with antivirus, and again, the whole idea here is defense in depth. One thing I did want to point out with SmartShield that does make it quite a bit different than other antivirus packages out there is that the technology does not rely upon identification. All right, the technology is actually a proactive protection instead of a reactive protection. So we don't identify things and then filter it out. With SmartShield, we're all-encompassing. So if I have a user, again, that space between the keyboard and the chair, do something that they shouldn't be doing, like maybe they're going to a website and they download some piece of malware on accident. They get that email that they think is legitimate. Scott mentioned that earlier. And somebody's going to click on the link. It's guaranteed. Somebody somewhere is going to click on that link, and the next thing you know, you have a piece of malware. It might be a bot or something that sits on your machine and then uses your resources for malicious means. So with SmartShield, even if it's a zero-day virus, we don't care because we're going to blow it out on that reboot. The technology actually prevents any kind of permanent change to the machine, and that includes all the way down and into your master boot record. The other thing I would point out is, and Scott mentioned System Restore, which is of course an alternative. The big difference between SmartShield and System Restore is that you're moving forward with the SmartShield technology. So I have my machine exactly the way I need it today with my updates or whatever applications, everything is current. I go ahead, I protect that machine with SmartShield. Every time I reboot it, it's going to go back to that last time I unprotected that machine and ran my updates. So next week comes along and I have more updates. I go ahead, I run those updates, therefore, again, bringing that image current to everything that I need. It might be Adobe, Flash, Java, whatever it might be. And then after all my updates are complete, I go ahead, I reprotect it. And now that becomes my new baseline protection, or I'm sorry, my new baseline image. So again, the idea there is that you're moving forward. And if you ever do encounter some kind of a malware that blue screens you, or again, the ransomware, as long as you are fully protected, SmartShield will protect you from ransomware. A few final notes on the software. We have enterprise version, and Scott did not get into the network application of it, the centralized console, nor did we have time today to do that. But you can centrally manage SmartShield from a server or a PC. And there's a multitude of functions and features in the Smart Patrol that are helpful for IT administrators. You can also have it as a standalone for laptop situations. If the laptop is leaving the network, you can have SmartShield on there, and that license and that product will go and it will protect that laptop even when it's off the network, even when it's not even connected to the Smart Control. The final thing is we do have a home user product, basically the same technology, except the product is a lot more user-friendly for the home user, and that just came out a few months ago. So we're happy about that, and we're trying to promote the presence of our home user product. So if you have kids, if you have parents, grandparents that you're constantly having to clean up those machines because of, and they don't mean it most of the time, obviously, but it happens, SmartShield may be a great solution for you. So again, definitely want to thank Scott Schaefer with Blade Technologies. Scott, that information was great today.
Hey, thanks a lot, Phil.
Yeah, and Blade Technologies, just like Centurion, is located right here in St. Louis, Missouri. All of our support and development is here in our corporate offices. Blade Technologies specializes in HIPAA and education. And Scott, is there anything else that maybe you might want to add about Blade that our audience should know about?
Well, sure. One thing, our practice is basically two separate areas, you could say. One is the managed services side, where we basically take control of a customer's network remotely, do everything that an IT admin needs to do, and just kind of it's a hands-off thing for the customer. And then we do more traditional consulting based around the Microsoft product line generally, but network engineering and it is really our sweet spot. And we all of our senior folks have their own areas of specialization. Like I mentioned, mine is digital forensics and cybersecurity. So that's what we do. We primarily work with small to medium guys. We do work with big companies, usually on very specialized things like SharePoint or SQL Server or something like that. They may not have that knowledge. So that's you can look at us at www.bladetechinc.com or call us at 314-752-7999, and certainly we can tell you a whole lot more.
All right, Scott, that's great. Again, you can find Scott on KPLR Channel 11, KTVI Fox, and on the radio you can hear him on News Talk KTRS and FM News Talk 97.1. And I think he's actually on a few other mediums out there as well. So again, we want to thank Scott Schaefer for joining us today and presenting that, the space between the keyboard and the chair, and how basically that space can be a major detraction, a major challenge for IT administrators. If you have further questions, we're going to leave the webinar open for about 5 minutes. Go ahead and send your questions in, and if you have a question after the webinar, go ahead and send them through our social media feeds, or you can contact us directly, and we'll be glad to get back to you. Again, my name is Phil Simeone with Centurion Technologies. Thanks, everyone, for your attendance today. We hope you found this webinar interesting. We will have a recording of this after we do probably about 2 days of post-editing. You can find that on our YouTube site. So again, thanks everybody for helping out today with the webinar. And again, we thank you, the audience, for joining. Again, my name is Phil Simeone, and have a great rest of your day.